What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so before I get into this video, I want to give a big shout out to the brother Aaron for the donation to the channel via the PayPal. Much respect to you for showing love to Too Raw for TV. All right, so he had a question, and his question is, what if Pete Maravich played in the ABA instead of playing in the NBA? Well, if I remember correctly, Pete Maravich was actually drafted in the ABA. And let me see something. I think he was drafted either first or second overall. I think it was by the Carolina Cougars, who were an ABA team that played, or a franchise played in the ABA. But one of the main reasons why Pete Maravich and a lot of other players chose to play in the NBA rather than the ABA is because the ABA had this policy where the money was like, I think like your salary was deferred, like it was held or something. Like you didn't get your money up front like you did in the NBA. So even though in the NBA these guys got these big contracts, I think it was like a holdup as far as their money, except for I think in the ABA there was this hardship clause where you could prove that your family's struggling and you needed your money up front. And a lot of those guys who happen to be poor black kids, a lot of times, although there was poor white kids, but the majority of the poor black, that's why a lot of them went to the ABA because they had this hardship clause. But anyway, what if Pete Maravich went to the ABA? What would happen? Well, I mean, like I said, all of these are just guesses, right? All I can do is guess. There's nothing I'm saying is etched in stone. I want to always emphasize that. But my best guess is that he would have sort of been getting the Caitlin Clark treatment, because right now Caitlin Clark is seen as the savior of the WNBA, which, I'm saying, has been under the radar for quite some time. And supposedly she's going to be the person that's going to catapult everybody else eventually into a better situation financially and as far as exposure to the masses. Now, I'm assuming that Pete Maravich, if this had been the course, would have done the same thing for the ABA, because we all know Dr. J was pretty much the Michael Jordan of the ABA. But Pete Maravich, let's be honest, for obvious reasons, would have been more marketable. Even more marketable, I should say. As Dr. J was very marketable. But he would have been even more marketable because, let's just be honest, he's white. And that would have appealed to a lot of basketball fans. Now remember, the 1970s, although from a fan standpoint, was a great decade because there was much more parity in the NBA. We didn't have, on the downside, if you want to look at it from an executive standpoint, we didn't have these juggernaut teams like Kobe and Shaq Lakers, or Steph and Clay's and the Warriors, or the Heatles, the Lahitos, or whatever you want to call it, with LeBron, Wade, and Bosh, or Jordan's Lakers, or Jordan Bulls, excuse me, or the Showtime Lakers, or Bird Celtics. We didn't have these juggernaut teams. But what you did have was a lot of really good teams that won between 50 and 55 games per year, who all had a legitimate shot at winning championships. If you notice, we didn't have any repeat champions in the 1970s. But at the same time, it was seen as a nadir in the NBA because of the fact that you didn't have you had stars, but you didn't have that marquee star, that star that electrified Madison Avenue, and some of that was, you know, once again, there was some racial there was some racial overtones behind that. You know what I'm saying? Pete Maravich was marketable. He was white, but he had a game that was very appealing. And at that particular time, the ABA was seen as more of a showcase league, a league that emphasized ball handling, a league that emphasized shooting. And Maravich had been the most prolific collegiate scoring machine ever. Still is. Still is. I mean, yeah, you know, a few of his records have been broken, but from a per game basis and from a prolific standpoint, he's still the greatest scorer ever, 44 points a game in college. And remember, the ABA had a 3-point shot, which he could have utilized and popularized. So while the NBA still would have been the more dominant league, he could have, along with Dr. J, you would have had a star who is bringing the game above the rim, coinciding with a guy like Pete Maravich, who would have been something like the Larry Bird of the ABA. More shooting, playmaking, you know. So he would have had that dynamic, that yin to Irvin's yang, and you could have marketed a Bird versus Magic matchup and Irvin versus Maravich in the ABA a decade earlier. So I think that would have been potentially something that could have made the ABA, at the very least, last almost a decade longer, and perhaps could have made it a permanent alternative to the NBA. Who knows? I don't know about that. I do think it would have at least caused the league to last a little longer. Look, WWE, formerly WWF, has monopolized wrestling, but for a very long time they had a main competitor in the WCW, and for a time WCW was winning. Perhaps the ABA, although I don't know whether they would have ever been the more dominant franchise, they could have been, at the very least, a consistent and tough alternative to the NBA, which have done nothing but at least improve the NBA product, right? So that's how I look at it. Um, you know, with Maravich still been, I think, would Maravich have been a better, would he have been more regarded as a Hall of Famer? Well, let's look at it like this. When people think of Pete Maravich, right, you tend to think more of his collegiate career. Because, let's be honest, as great as he was as an NBA player, his career was a bit underwhelming. He had stretches where he played phenomenal basketball, but he wasn't a really good fit in Atlanta offensively. The schematics of it all. He wasn't the greatest fit there. And in Utah, he didn't really win. He had individual success. You know, he led the league in scoring in 76-77 season, 31.1 points per game. I think it was February 25th, 1977, when he scored an amazing 68 points against the New York Knicks. But his career was a little bit uneven in the NBA. You know, there were times when his shooting eye was a little bit off. He did have issues with turning the ball over, and he didn't win. He only played, I think, 26 total playoff games. So I can't help but think that it shifts to Pete Maravich being, you know, the savior of the ABA. Although I do think some of it would be predicated on him winning. So maybe, especially earlier on, if let's say the first 2 years of his career, if Maravich was able to at least get to an ABA finals, uh, and preferably was able to win, they could get surround him with some talent, then and they win, then his legacy is even more enhanced in my opinion, even if it's in the ABA. And for another thing I want to say too, before I end this video, I have a sinking suspicion that if Pete Maravich played the ABA and won, suddenly, all of a sudden, well, I shouldn't say suddenly, all of a sudden, it's redundant. Suddenly, I suspect that the NBA powers to be all of a sudden want to legitimize the ABA. All of a sudden, now they'll include the ABA stats. So that's how I look at it. In conclusion, I think that if he played in the ABA, it would have done nothing but enhance his game. I mean, enhance his credentials because it was a league pretty much showcased for his skill set, much more perimeter orientated. Um, the ABA, especially early on, was not a league that showcased a lot of great big men. So there have been less resistance at the rim, I would suspect. So I think he would have shot a higher percentage. I think they would have tried to, whatever team, let's say it was the Carolina Cougars. Matter of fact, let's look at something right quick. Let's go to the Carolina Cougars. Let me look at the 70-71 season in ABA. Let me look at their roster. Okay, they went 34-50. Okay. Uh, they were not a great team. Looking at this team now. Okay, so I see Jumpin' Joe Caldwell play for them. So I guess Joe Caldwell, who had just moved, who had just took the leap from the NBA to ABA himself, he averaged 23.3 points per game that year. I'm guessing, you can make the argument that it could have put Pete Maravich at small forward, and he could have been the first point forward. Um, George Lehman averaged 17.3. I'm not familiar who he is. Okay, he's a point guard. Hmm. Yeah, this ain't really the best team. So yeah. So anyway, if you have Pete Maravich and they at least make the playoffs and then show improvement from there, yeah, then I could definitely see Pete Maravich having an even more enhanced legacy, playing in the ABA and legitimizing that league and popularizing that league. And if they're more popular, then that would have brought even more players making the transition from the NBA to the ABA. And I think that just would have enhanced Pete Maravich's legacy, no matter how you look at it. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Tell me what you guys think.